Hey there YouTube, hello knife people. I'm Joe, you're watching Ink&Iron, and today we have one of our first sort of exit reviews from a knife from my collection. It's going to be for the Spyderco Kapara. I did just sell this knife to Jade Schafer, and if you don't know Jade, one of my only patrons right now on Patreon. So yeah, they got priority for calling dibs on this. So let's go to the tabletop. I'll tell you all about this knife, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and why ultimately I decided to sell it. So let's turn the camera around and get started. And if you're wondering, there will be a knife sale video coming soon. Welcome to the tabletop review for the Spyderco Kapara. So first things first, I'm going to roll in some specs, and all of these specs I pulled from this knife itself. These are all my measurements, weight, length, all that kind of thing. Okay, now that you have all those specifications, let's talk a little bit about this knife. So this is produced by Spyderco. It is made overseas, let me see, at the Taichung, Taiwan factory. And Alastair Phillips designed this to emulate a redback spider found in Australia. I don't remember if it's supposed to be like a leg or thorax or something like that, but it definitely has an organic look and feel to it. Alastair Phillips would call it a food prep knife and EDC knife, and I would say I agree with that design philosophy. The steel for this knife is S30V. Oops, sorry. CPM S30V. And it's a pretty good steel, very stain resistant in my experience, takes a good edge. The deployment method is going to be the thumb hole here. There really isn't much else going on. You do have a compression lock, so you can either roll it out like that, or you can Spidey flick it with the middle finger. This is a full flat grind on this blade, as you can see. Comes down from a pretty thin stock. It's like 3.17 millimeters, so it's a very thin blade stock. We have a distal taper towards the tip, so you can see it slimming down and slimming down. Comes to a very fine point at the end here. This is the factory edge bevel. Haven't really done much. I think I stropped it a little bit. And if you notice the notch on the back side here, that indicates that this is a second sale knife, and literally the reason is this tiny little pepper grain sized imperfection right here. This is a very small pit in the steel. Let me see if I can show you. There you go, we're looking at that spot up close. You can see it's a little divot in the steel. And that's it. So I like to use this knife as an example of Spyderco's quality control methods. Like the length of this blade is about 95 millimeters or 3.7 inches. It does give you a pretty significant reach, and it definitely feels longer than other like 3.5 inch size pocket knives that I've dealt with. So the behind the edge thickness is about 0.6 millimeters. That makes this knife a little bit chunkier behind the edge, and what I mean by that is right behind the blade grind here. It's a little bit thicker than like the Spyderco Yojimbo, which I also reviewed recently on this channel. However, it doesn't seem to affect slicing performance. This does seem to slice rather well. There's a little bit of copy paper. It's a pretty loud slicer, but I find that's pretty typical of a factory grind. The lockup is solid, so we don't have any vertical play. There's maybe a little bit of side-to-side wiggle, but you can't hear it. You can just feel it a little bit, which is pretty normal for a compression lock from Spyderco. The cutting performance of this blade is good. I really have no complaints about it. I like S30V. I think it takes a good edge when I end up resharpening it, so no complaints there. The performance in food prep is actually decent. This is ground a little bit like a kitchen knife would be, and so feels very much like a small paring knife when you're, skinning apples or cutting up potatoes, whatever you got going on. And part of the design philosophy here, the compression lock on the back side makes it so that this front side of the knife has nothing that food and other particulate can jam up into when you're cutting and slicing fruits and vegetables and meat if you're so inclined. I think that was a pretty good design decision on Alistair Phillips' part, and I can see the reasoning behind it. Okay, so let's move on to talking about the handle here. Obviously our handle is made of carbon fiber, if you can't tell. We have steel liners in here. They are milled out a little bit. I think you can see on this edge over here, but this side over here rather. You can see the milling down there in the steel. We do have a red G10 backspacer. It does pick up, it lets a little bit of light through it. It's slightly translucent, but it doesn't quite glow, which would be pretty cool. The traction plan on here is pretty scant, which I think makes sense for an EDC/kitchen knife. I don't know about you, my kitchen knives don't have a whole bunch of G10 and jimping and stuff like that, so I'm not too bothered not having spine jimping or choil jimping or, a whole lot to grip onto, because this isn't going to be a super hard use tool. This is going to be in a pretty safe, stable environment like a kitchen. So let's talk a little bit about the ergonomics of this knife. I think the organic sort of shapes that we get from that redback spider design are helping it in the open position. This knife is pretty comfortable. It feels thin, but it has a decent amount of thickness because these handles are pretty chunky for how skinny they are. So you do get a very kitchen knife feel in that sense. So I like the ergonomics quite a bit. Okay, so let's talk about one of the elements that isn't as strong for me, in my opinion, on this knife, and that would be the clip. It is a Spyderco deep carry wire clip on there, which seems like an odd choice given that we have a premium blade steel, we have a designer working on this knife, and we have a carbon fiber slab handle. I would have expected at least a titanium clip or something like that on here. I think the wire clip was kind of an odd choice. Not that it's a bad clip, it's perfectly functional, nice and springy, but you get these weird grooves on the opposite side that you're not using. And then I think aesthetically it doesn't quite match the rest of it, but as I said, that's more of an opinion than anything. It is nice that it is left and right hand carry. Given that you can move the clip to the other side, this knife is, like any other compression lock from Spyderco, a little awkward to work with your left hand, but I think if you're used to that kind of thing and you have experience with a compression lock in your left hand from Spyderco, that you're not going to have much trouble with this knife. I know what you're looking at up here. This is a very smooth steel plate. However, this cutout is such that you're not really going to slip off of it. And while we're here, just take a look at that guillotine action. This knife is uber smooth. This is actually a CQI, that stands for Constant Quality Improvement version of the Kapara from Spyderco. Basically, they added a pivot bushing that makes it super smooth and easy to deploy, and is really quite satisfying. The reason I sold this knife is that I like everything about it except for how it feels in my hand for opening and closing. I like it closed, I like it open, I think it feels really good in the hand open, I enjoy the performance, but this position for my hand that it has to get into to open and, to close the blade rather, this is really uncomfortable for me, and I'm not totally sure why. I really don't have a problem with compression locks, except for this one. So I'm pretty bummed out that this just didn't make the mark for me. I think aesthetically it's awesome. The design features and philosophy are really good. And honestly, I think it's some of Spyderco's best work. So yeah, this just happened to be a miss for me. And I'm a little sad about it, but I'm glad it's going to be going to a really good home. One more design feature I'd like to point out is that this lanyard hole it runs through the backspacer here, the G10, and I think that's a good design because then your lanyard hole doesn't become just a means for dust and debris to kind of get into your handle scales. So I do like that. And as always, the fit and finish, blade centering, all that kind of thing from Spyderco is flawless, except for that one little pit that they have in the blade there. All right, and we have reached the price point discussion, which means I'm going to be rolling in some size comparison knives. It's a Spyderco Para 3 and a PM2, just for good measure. So the price point on the Spyderco Kapara is $290 MSRP. That would be what Spyderco recommends to retailers as the selling price. You can find it for cheaper, but I typically go off of MSRP just to make this discussion easier. Is this knife worth $290? Well, getting one new from the factory involves having the Spyderco warranty behind it, which is nice. It is carbon fiber handles. It is a designer knife, so it does have a lot of things going for it. Let's roll in the 3-inch cut jack. Here's a native 5. For me, I'm glad I got this as a seconds knife because it wasn't a whole lot more than like $100. I got it for like $105, which was cool. At $290, I think my recommendation would be get this knife in hand before pulling the trigger on it, because as I said, I liked everything about it except for how it felt in my hand, which was pretty disappointing. I'm not gonna lie. It's an Opinel number 8 and a Victorinox Explorer. So overall, I think that this knife is going to be worth it for some of you. Probably not all of you. It's not quite a universal knife in terms of aesthetics or in terms of its action. Something like the Paramilitary 2 really beats it out because of this generic handle design and generic blade shape and sort of generic compression lock action. It's much more recommendable than the Spyderco Kapara. That being said, if this knife strikes your fancy, I encourage you to try and get it in hand, and if you like it then, I think it's totally worth the purchase. If you're like me and you're not totally sold on the idea, maybe try and find it on the secondary market. Okay, so there we have it. That is the exit review for the Spyderco Kapara. It has been a nice knife to have in the collection, and I will miss it, honestly. As I said, I really wish that I could have liked it more personally, but I'm glad it's going out to somebody who's going to enjoy it. Thank you for watching this video today. If you like fountain pens and other EDC gear, feel free to follow my channel. I have all kinds of stuff that goes on here. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more content from me, please subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my Patreon. It is free to join. Okay, I've been Joe. You've been watching Ink&Iron, and catch you on my next video.